Alright, today we're going to go through the process of changing the inner tube on a Ninebot. This is the same for the Ninebot C, C+, E, E+. It's all the same thing for the most part. Pretty straightforward. It looks a little involved when we start getting into it because everything here, we have to crack this thing open in half and you know, maneuver a few things around, but it's not crazy. The way this is all put together, it's well thought out. We're going to need a few set of tools here. Your basic flathead, Phillips, set of Allen keys, bicycle repair tube kit. We're not going to be fixing the tube in our Ninebot, but we're going to use the levers that come with this. So ultimately, we're going to need to pry the tire off the wheel in order to get access to the tube. It would help if you had a tube as well. I have a brand new OEM tube that I just ordered from Ninebot. And then it's probably redundant, but I've got a set of just miscellaneous bits here and extensions and whatnot. First things first, we always make sure our Ninebot is off, which my Ninebot is off. We're gonna pop open the pedal stand here. Before we do that, I just jumped the gun there. We're going to use an Allen key. Right on the bottom of the pedal stand, there's a provision for your Allen key. You're going to use that Allen key to loosen the screw that's inside the bracket. We're not going to take the screw all the way out. We just need to loosen it enough where we could pop this pin out that's held in by compression. Okay? With that, I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver and gently push that pin out. And I'm not swinging like a monster here. I just want to pull this out as gentle as possible. This is the actual pin, okay? Before you start pulling this out, make note that there's two plastic bushings in here. We don't want to lose those bushings. They are important. So what I do, I'm going to put this pin back in here and just push the bushing through here, and we can set this aside so it's not in my way, and I know that I'm not going to lose those pieces here. Okay? So we've got the pedal assembly off. Set that aside. We've got the light ring we need to work with. I use a basic flathead screwdriver and just gently look for some sort of spot here where it's a little open and just start gently prying. These are clipped in, so obviously you're not going to want to, you know, start ripping this apart because you don't want to do any damage to the clips. There we go. I've had mine off a few times. The thing that bothers me is that it does seem like the more you take this off, the easier it is to come off. So don't open this up just for the sake of opening up. If you open it up, make sure that you're doing it for a purpose. Anytime you deal with plastic clips and so, you always run the risk of snapping one of these things off. So that's that. Let's work with the battery. When working with anything electric, you always want to disconnect the battery as soon as you possibly can. It's just good practice. So why don't we go ahead and do that. 1, 2, like I say in all my other videos, if we are removing 4 or 5 screws, we want to make sure we're putting back 4 or 5 screws. So here, these 2 screws, they belong to that assembly. I'm just going to put that over there. And here's our battery. There's 2 harnesses in here. Disconnect one, disconnect the other. When you put this back, it's not omnidirectional. There's only one way to do it. But it's important to make note of your orientation because you don't want to bend any pins or anything. The battery, we can safely set this aside. Now the Ninebot is officially dead. We're going to take this off. This guy right here, this rubber piece, it kind of just snaps in, and then there's an adhesive underneath as well to just secure it. Do your best not to touch this. You don't want to loosen up that glue. It's important to have it and keep it clean. Don't get dirt all over it. You get dirt on it, it's not really going to adhere anymore. So I'm just going to safely set that aside. We will now find 4 more screws and a magnet. This we're going to use an Allen key for. And it's a different size Allen key than the one we just used. I believe it's this one. Is it this one? Oh, that magnet. I think it is. That's too big. Let's try the next one down. I don't have sizes on these keys. I couldn't tell you which key to use and which not to use. Nope. Nope. Sorry guys. Ta-da. Alright. There we go. 1. 2. 3. And 4. Alright, there we go. And let's go ahead and just remove these guys. These screws are pretty important because they actually hold down the center of the cladding right to the frame of the Ninebot itself. So you'll see there's bushings in here, I mean little washers for that matter. It's an essential piece of the core of the actual Ninebot. And I'm just making sure I'm not misplacing any of these pieces of hardware here. Let's make sure we get all this back in together correctly. We have 1, 2. There we go. We got that. And our last one. Okay. Alright, and this guy comes out. Okay. Oops, we have 2 in here. That's where the other one went. Let's put this back in correctly. There we go. Looks like the last time I took this out, I made the mistake of using 2 washers on this one piece of hardware and no washer on the other one. Not cool. Alright, I'm going to set this aside gently. So we have that hardware isolated. 1, 2, 3, 4. Phillips head screws. If I remember the last time this screwdriver didn't really cut it for me, let's try it again. We have 1. Yeah, this screwdriver wasn't really the right one. 2. I might use a bit when I go back. So there's number 2. Alright, and here's 3. And here is 4. Very good. We're getting there. Okay. What else do we have? These guys right here, these connectors, I'm going to disconnect them. This is for the light ring. When you hook this up, you've got a notation for 1 and 2. Make note, 1 should be plugged into 1, 2 should be plugged into 2. The light ring will still light up if you've got it backwards, but what ends up happening is that the lights will not coincide with the rotation of the wheel if you have those numbers backwards. So in other words, if you've got 2 hooked to 1 and 1 hooked to 2, as your wheel rotates this way, your lights will go this way. So you want to make note of that before you do a final button and assembly on this when we're done with this repair. Because ultimately you have to tear this back down again to this stage to correct that. There's no way to access these cables once this is all properly secured. Okay, back to clips again. This outer shell now pops out now that we've freed it from all the hardware. This is basically the same thing you would end up doing here if you were replacing the body cladding on your Ninebot. Like you can see, I've got some road rash on mine. One day, if I feel up for it, I might actually go ahead and purchase replacement panels to make my Ninebot look brand new again, which is not a hard thing to do. I'm going to set that aside. Good, and I'm actually just going to take my hardware for that and put that in the center there so I know where that all belongs. We have more Allen keys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 Allen screws, I should say. And we need our Allen key for. So we're going to go ahead and start breaking these free. And once that's done, this is the last piece of the body that we need to remove. And we will have full access to the actual tire and the tube. If you've ever had to take the tube out of your Ninebot, you'll know it is a pain in the neck. It's not rocket science, it's just a lot of muscle. there's really no clearance in there. Everything has kind of been engineered to fit one way, and that's it. It's not as if you've got the luxury of some extra additional space. That tire that's on that rim is really tightly mounted, and you're going to need some form of levers, like tire levers, preferably plastic tire levers, because without that, I doubt you're going to get this tire off. I know people have resorted to using like a butter knife or a flathead screwdriver, but then ultimately you run the risk of puncturing the tire and then ultimately puncturing the tube when you put it all back together again. So you're not going to want to do that, and it kind of defeats the purpose of the repair. I actually had 3 tire levers, and the first time I did it, I put too much stress on one of the tire levers, and the tire lever snapped. That's how tight this is all set up. I'm hoping not to make that mistake a second time today. So I'm going to be very careful about that and try to be smart. Alright, let's go here. And let's see what else do we have. And we got that. And we have that. Let's get this off. And let's take a look at this. After this, we have 2 more to go. And we're almost set. Good. What else do we have? Alright. And again, this is kind of clipped in, so it might give you a little resistance, but just slowly pry it back and work with it. Don't just grab it and fling it that way, because you'll definitely crack something. I'm really not a fan of working with clips, because that's always my biggest fear. But it is the reality of what we're dealing with. Alright. There you go. This is now set. Boy, I hate how loose that is. Okay. Here we are. The next thing we need to do, so we have this all exposed here. Looks a little intimidating. It's nothing to be intimidated by. I have my extension on here. Let's take this thing off. We don't ride around with the extension, obviously. And the compromise on mine, someone might be asking, why did I actually go out and buy another tube when I could have just patched it? I do have a patch kit here. The compromise in my tube wasn't the actual tube. It was the stem itself. And I took it down, not the valve, but the actual stem. And it appears there's a little hole or a puncture. And I took it down to the bicycle shop, and they verified, sorry, this isn't something that can really be reliably repaired. You're better off just going and buying another tube, which they didn't have, and I had to go order one online. They said it's most likely a casting flaw. They've seen this before. Not necessarily for the Ninebot, but for other types of tubes that have that bent angle valve. And I guess sometimes if it just wasn't, you know, bent correctly, they run the risk of compromising the metal. So as you see, I'm just trying to get a feel now for, not that it matters, let me work on this side away from the valve. Alright, finally, we made some progress. Take these guys out. I'm sure if I had better tire levers, this would go a little smoother for me, but I only have what I have to work with here. So I'm just gonna, I got the wheel coming off the rim now. Okay, that's it. That's all we have to do to take the tube out, as far as I'm concerned. And we're going to snake our tube out of the hole, or the stem out of the hole for the wheel. And it just requires a little wiggling and whatnot. Like I said, nothing here is really convenient. It's all a bit of a bear to work with, but it's not hard. It's not rocket science. Come on. Just a little left tap, see if I can. There we go. Just need a little finessing. And that's it. Bad tube removed. New tube goes back in. First thing we'll do, let's remove the Schrader valve cap. Make sure it doesn't fall in there. I like to get the stem back in the actual wheel before I do anything else, because that is probably the more pain in the neck, daunting task in any of this. Again, not hard, it just is not a lot of clearance. So you want to kind of get that out of the way while you have access. Because once the tube is in there, it's not really going to be too flexible, easy to work with at that point. Let's get this in here, come on. Let's make some room. Let's get this guy out of the way. Only goes in one way. Come on. Perhaps this would be a little bit easier if I took the actual tire off. But to get the tire back on, it's even more of a pain in the neck. So I figured I would just do it this way. There we go. Alright, I don't know if you can see that there, but I got the actual tube, the stem, going through the hole. And that's right. Now, when we get the tube back in, pay close attention. You don't want to have this thing twisted up. I'm sure it'll actually right itself as you put air in there, but then again, it's so tight in here, I don't know. So let's get this all tucked in neatly. And just make sure it's not twisted around and knotted up. So I got a little twist over here. And this tube is completely deflated, and that helps. You're not going to be able to do this with air in the tube. Alright, before I button this up, I'm just going to look around really quick, make sure everything is the way it should be, and I think it is. Just want to double check that. Okay, good. I think we're in good shape. Okay, I'm just feeling the back end of this, make sure the tube didn't come out, but it didn't. We have a valve here in place. I'm actually going to, I don't think it's a necessity, I'm just going to put this in here. So I have easier access now to that valve. Okay, well the stem, I keep saying that. Now, it's the reverse of where we were before. This part requires a little more muscle, but believe it or not, it's not as much of a pain in the neck as taking it off. As we get closer and closer here, this gets tighter and tighter. And this rubber is not extremely forgiving. So you're going to find you're going to get, a quarter of an inch there and a quarter of an inch there and back and forth and back and forth. Alright, this isn't going anywhere now. Okay. Cool. And we're just going to tuck that in the lip and just keep going. Making our way around. I don't usually use anything for this. I don't think there's any kind of tool that would help me. Or if there is, I'm not aware of it. So again, we're just going to work our way around. And the more we go in, the tighter this will get. This is pretty taut right now, but it will go in. We're getting there. Let's try this side a little bit. Okay. There we go. Boom. Got it. Before we go any further, it'd probably be in my best interest to get air in this thing. Just for the sake of making sure that everything is properly seated. And this is rotating freely. Let me get my compressor, and I'll be right back, and we will do that. All right, I have pumped it up to 50 pounds of PSI, 50 pounds of air, and I just did a quick rotation to make sure there's no wobbles or bubbles, and I'm pretty confident that this is seated all correctly. So, nothing left to do other than put it back together. And we're just going to work in the reverse order. I'm going to loosely fit this, but make note that we've got our cables here that we need to tend to. Again, none of this is rocket science, but you do want to pay close attention to your wiring harness because there's not a lot of room. It's not very forgiving, right? And I guess it's good that there's not like some abundance of cabling back here. But if in the process we get halfway through assembling this and these cables end up falling back there, I don't know of any good way of getting them back out. Which would basically mean you're stuck having to take all this back together again and take it apart again. Not fun. Let's see correctly. I'm on something. Try that again. And these are 2 battery cables right here. There's 1 and 2. And then you got your 2 LED, your light ring cables right here. 1 and 2. Okay. Alright, that's feeling a lot better. Notice again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm not forcing anything here. I'm not jamming anything here. If it doesn't feel like it's lining up correctly, I'm just simply taking it off and reseating it. It's probably good practice with anything you take apart and put back together. So we're going to reassemble pretty much in the order that we disassembled. Alright, and again, like I said, keep a close eye on your light ring cables because I've had it once where I took this thing apart and unfortunately the cables fell back in that hole and I really had no way of getting it out other than taking the shell off, and that's silly. But then again, I'm not going to ride around without my LED lights, right? Alright. I'm just checking there. It's actually nice to hopefully have a tube now to fill up every single time I go out, because that wasn't too fun. And towards the end, I'm guessing it just got worse. So I would ride for 20 minutes or so and I'd have like 20 pounds of air left. And then the riding characteristics change dramatically as that tube starts to get more and more deflated. So you weren't really getting the proper experience that way. You know, if you're setting out at 50 PSI, you want to come home at 50 PSI. Alright. Let's get this last guy in and then we'll torque him down. I'm not looking to torque him down where you hear like this monster is crack anywhere, but just enough where you know it's snug and it's not going anywhere. 1. 2. And I'm sure there's a, kind of like putting a tire on, there's a proper way of torquing these down. Instead of just going all in a row, I'm just kind of working opposite ends, like in a diagonal. I don't know if it matters. It just seems to make sense. That one. And we got our last 2 on top. Alright. 1. Where are you? There we go. This one's not tight at all. Okay. And the last guy. Let's move this out of the way. Okay, and there we go. This guy is on, and that's all secure. Let's go ahead and take these guys and put them back on. I'll do this one at a time. Get it in film cube. There we go. honestly, anyone could do this. When I first got my Ninebot, two things happened. I had the issue with my tube, and then I had an issue with my handle. The handle broke off. You know, right away I'm thinking, damn, I gotta send this thing out for repairs. You know, how am I gonna do this? And then you go online, and I guess since this is still something of a hobby that's in its infant stages, there's really not a lot of write-ups on any of this stuff. You got some good guys like Speedy Feet and guys on YouTube that have some really cool videos, and they've helped. I use them as resources in the past, but when it came to the handle replacement, I've only seen one write-up for it. You know, anytime you start off in a new hobby and it's in its infantile stages, you're sort of on your own. Same thing with like the drones. I have a drone. Now it's a commercial, it's very popular, but in the early days of droning, you basically were a pioneer in that, and coming up with wire harnesses and experimenting with different firmwares. And unfortunately, some of the guys didn't have good luck with that, and they blew up their NASA modules. And you obviously want to avoid any damage here. All right, these guys are tightened down. Let me just do one last check. This magnet is strong. 1, 2, 3, 4. That ain't going anywhere. All right. And we're just gonna put this right back in there. And you'll feel it. It kind of just clicks in, or clips in, I should say. Okay. And that's on there. That's done. Let's get the battery back together. Alright, so here's the battery. Quite heavy. 1 and 2. Now, this is where you want to pay close attention to those light ring cables. I'm just going to gently set them over here. Alright, these two connectors only go in one way. So we're going to go ahead, and we have 1, and we're looking 2. And again, it only goes in one way. I just want to double check that my yellow lines up to yellow, my black lines up to black. I'm sure if you put enough force, you could force it to go that way. You don't want to force anything here. Okay, making sure I'm not pinching my cables, which I was for a second. And what we failed to do, we didn't get this back under here, and that's where it belongs. There we go. Cool. That's underneath there. And my wires are nice and tidy. Let's move this up a bit so we can clip in, and then back down, and there we go. I'm fairly confident that that is nice and secure. And these two Phillips go back in. Alright, 1 and 2. Excellent. And we're in the home stretch. We have 2 more things to contend to. Well, 3 I should say. We've got this outer part of the fairing, and the light ring, and the pedal assembly. So, we have to get this back in first before we get the light ring in. I mentioned before that my flathead screwdriver wasn't really cooperating with that type of screw. Let's see if this bit is any better. It bites in. I don't want to. Nah. The Phillips, the indentation on the screw itself is quite shallow, and I don't want to hollow that out. So let's do it again. That's much better. That bites into it nice. Alright. And this way we could properly torque that down as well, without running any damage, or risk of damage, I should say, to the screw. I'm not tightening down all the way. Now I'm just working the same crisscross fashion. Hopefully without shooting the screw across the room. Alright. One, Okay, so that's in. Tube is holding air, that's always a good sign. Alright, what else do we have? We have our light ring. As I noted before, if you look down into the wiring harness, there's a clip or a brace that goes around the actual the cable. One says 1, the other says 2. So we're going to connect it. 1 goes to this guy, and 2 goes to the other. And we're just going to line up our yellow to yellow. Oh, I'm sorry, black to black, white to white. Alright, just paying close attention that we're not bending any pins in there. If it doesn't feel like it's going in correctly, back up, start over again. At this point in time, I like to do a safety check. I've got everything wired up. Before I button this in and cram all that cabling in there, I want to fire my Ninebot up. Alright. Alright, Ninebot is on. And it is rotating on its own, so that's good. Cables are all, my LED is lit up. Alright, nice and bright. And I think we're in good shape. So we're going to turn this back off. Plop it down. And now we're going to plumb this cabling back into that little crevice. And there's also like a gully that this cabling kind of guides into. So it's not running the risk of A, flailing about as you're riding, and then B, getting clipped or crimped inadvertently. We don't want that. This isn't any kind of heavy gauge cabling here. This is all pretty lightweight stuff. Once you see that the cabling is all in, which I'm not, I'm just going to use this to gently guide that down. See, it came out of that little valley again. Alright, let's try it one more time. Okay, good. That's in. And this guy came out, so let's get that all in correctly. There we go. There we go. Alright, now it's safe. Alright, and this light ring only snaps in one way. There's a provision here in the light ring that encompasses the bracket for the pedal assembly. And that's it. Light ring is snapped in. Last but not least, pedal assembly. Without that, we're not really riding far, are we? Alright, we're going to take this pin out, remembering to care for those bushings. And what I like to do is just go one at a time and line that bushing up with the hole. It might take a few attempts. And we have, oops, first one's usually the easiest. Hey. Just try that again, there we go. One. And now we got the first one in. I'll just sandwich that in between the frame and the pedal assembly itself. And I kind of just spin that rod back and forth to guide it through. And did I overshoot it? Nope, not yet. Alright, and we're in. And I see it popping out to the other side. Excellent. And we're going to, most importantly, tighten that screw up on the bottom. Alright, and just going to give it a little, like that. That's it. That guy's not going anywhere. And that's it. I've got my new tube in there. I feel it's holding air, which I'm happy about. And that is it. I can go safely riding now. And most importantly, you now know how to change your own tube if you need to. Hopefully you don't, but if you do, order the tube and now you can do it yourself. Use this video as a reference. If you have any questions or complications with the matter, or advice, or you have a better way of doing it, let me know. Share it with the community. We're pioneers in this community, so we have to work together on spreading the word, basically. All right, thanks. Have a good one. Safe riding.